Hey everyone, welcome to Food Talk Live. A reminder that this episode will also appear on our podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. So please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. It really means a lot to us. Before I introduce our guest today, I want to give a shout out to my co-founder, Bernard Pollock. He, with some incredible and really talented people, has created an off-Broadway musical called Garjana that will focus on creating resilience to climate change and, how to solve issues around food insecurity and inequality in the food system. It was supposed to open this summer at La Mama Theater in New York City, which is a nonprofit theater company doing amazing things. Obviously, because of COVID-19, that has been pushed. It will come out next year. I'm knocking on wood to make sure that happens. But it's such an interesting way to integrate what we do with, talking about food and agriculture with the arts and with the arts community. And we have amazing people who are working with us on it, including Rocky Dewoni, who's a Grammy-nominated Afrobeats star. He's a UNEP ambassador, United Nations Environment Program ambassador. We have Whitney Mosery, who has been working with Cirque du Soleil. So we have a whole crew of talented people who are really committed to telling these stories around our food system. And I think there's really no more important time than now to be using the arts as a way to tell stories, as a way to heal, as a way to express rage and grief and sadness and joy and hope. So I'm looking forward to next year when Bernie's vision can come to fruition and we can get this off the ground. And I know our guest today, LaDonna Redmond, this is something that's, the use of art to tell stories and around food and around inequality and around diversity in the food system is something that she cares a lot about. LaDonna is the diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant at Colluminate and the curator, director, and co-producer of Soul Food Monologues. She's somebody I've admired really my whole career because she's a longtime food justice advocate. She has successfully worked to get Chicago public schools to change policies on junk food, launched urban agriculture projects, started a community grocery store, and worked on federal farm policy to expand access to healthy food in low-income and underserved communities. She was also the leader of the food justice program at the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy based in Minnesota, and they're longtime partners of Food Tank and have been very good to me over the years. LaDonna, thank you so much for being here. You're one of my sheroes and heroines in this movement, and it's a pleasure to see you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the invitation.
So I want to start off with this situation that we're in now. COVID-19 has exposed so many cracks and so many sorts of, pieces of the food system that are broken. And I'm wondering, what you're seeing in terms of how it's exposing the lack of the lack of equality in our food system right now, and maybe talk a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm. I really think that what's going on right now is perhaps on one hand exposing people who weren't quite sure what the inequities were, but also confirming those who live in the gap of the inequity that they indeed are not crazy, that that there is something wrong here. And so I think COVID-19 is certainly a tragedy, so many people losing their lives, but also an opportunity for us to really clearly see that inequity doesn't just happen to people, it's systemic.
Right.
It is not, one time, it's episodic. There are multiple episodes of trauma that has come through our food system, whether we're talking about land or access to food. Certainly poverty is traumatic or has been traumatized, if you will. And the results is that communities can't get what they need. So now we know that not only are people hungry, people don't have jobs and people can't pay their bills, therefore they won't have housing. So all
Right.
of these multiple food, housing, shelter conversations, are now on the plate for almost every person around the world.
Well, and people who didn't experience the things that, many communities that who are underserved or communities of color are now in those situations where they don't know where their next meal is coming from. They don't know how to pay the rent. They were living, what they thought were, sort of stable lives, and this has upended everything. So I do think in some ways it levels the playing field. I mean, I don't want to be crass, but it
Mhm.
does sort of expose us all to, this is how many millions of people in the United States were living, and we just didn't see them, and we chose not to see them.
Mhm. Well, and I think the ideology of white supremacy, where we have this standard of white body supremacy, where we look at white people or people in white bodies, and we think that everything is fine and everything is wonderful. And I think it's oppressive, certainly in terms of its push on people in black and brown bodies, but it's also oppressive to people in white bodies because now
Sure.
you know that you have lived a lie. You know that you are just like everyone else. And
Right.
I think what is terrifying to so many people is that they're now finding out that the idea of skin supremacy or the idea of exclusion or the idea that it is someone's fault that they
Right.
are unable to feed themselves or they have to work two jobs is just totally blown out of the water.
Right. But again, I mean, despite the tragedy and the suffering that's going on, it's such it's an amazing opportunity for those of us who work on food and agriculture or who work in the arts
Mhm.
or, just human beings in general to really understand other humans in a way that we haven't before. And I know we're seeing a lot of increases in violence in certain communities, and certainly when white people storm, state government with guns and demand, to be for their state to be open. If people of color did that, it would, there'd be
Oh, there will be a
a very different situation.
But we have
Exactly.
history. We have history to look back upon, not we don't have to go that far back. I mean, we can go to Kent State, we can go to the
Right.
civil rights movement where dogs and water hoses and guns were turned on children because
Sure.
they were marching for their freedom. So historically, we know that black and brown bodies that would not be tolerated at all. When you look at the Black Panther Party, and the
Right.
guns that they brung to the California Capitol because they too had the right to bear arms, brung the wrath of the federal government on them. So, no, we're not treated the same yet. There's only one food system, and people like to
Right.
think they're finding out that it's not two, it's not three, it's not four, it's one. So
Right.
when it runs out of toilet paper, nobody can get it. When it runs
Right.
out of chicken, nobody can get the chicken except for the smart people. Now you and I know where to get chicken because we know chicken farmers. So now
Wait,
that's the realization that
yeah.
there's some agency in our food system, but what people are not able to do is access that agency because they don't have the information.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And getting that information out there, I mean, I know that's so critical to the work that you do and
Mhm.
creating awareness. I'm wondering, you use the word trauma, and as a white person, I don't think that people like me understand this sort of how a history of colonialism and a history of racism creates this sort of generational trauma. And I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about what that really looks like and what that means, and how what that means and how people of color and people in low income communities, how it makes them sort of view the world, because they have this sort of embedded trauma because of how their grandparents were treated.
Mhm. Well, I think that's an important story, but in the work that I do, I don't start quite right there. I'm gonna get there, but I wanna do a little bit of a precursor
Sure. Of
because I
course.
think where we are right now in this age of awareness, where we are now seeing that these multiple systems are not colorblind. They get everybody. They after everybody. So they have been historically targeted and built on people who are in Black, brown, or indigenous bodies. We know that, and I'm going to talk about that. But what I want to bring up in this conversation is the trauma on the white body. Because, see, white people have a tendency to think that, well, if we help people of color heal their trauma, everything will be okay. That's not true. You have trauma. So what is it like to heal from the colonistic idea that you should be healthy on top of someone else's inequity? What makes you think that you should be able to take a gun, a rifle, an automatic weapon? Because some of those weapons in Michigan, I could see they had been adapted.
Right.
What makes you think that? And what will it take for you to understand that your well-being does not have to be and should not be at the expense of someone else's well-being? So getting people in white bodies to look at their own trauma, the historical nature of exploitation, the implicit bias around any difference. Because again, in this ideology of white supremacy, there's the ideology that everyone has to be the same, and to notice anything that is different, whether it's skin color or physical ability or anything else, is to be the other. So this othering has to be reckoned with. But the history of white supremacy and its exploitive tactics back from the Dark Ages, people in white bodies have to reckon with that.
Yeah.
In the United States, whose ancestry is tied to immigration in the early 1800s, who grew up on farms, have to reckon with the notion that that land belongs to indigenous people and what happened to the people who were there before your family came. They have to reckon with that. There isn't a place in our society for the reckoning to happen. So we keep going into this place of, well, if we could just fix Black and brown people, and I'm not saying that's what you were saying, so don't take it.
No, of course not. Of course not.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. So
no.
Place of, hey, if we just understand what's going on over there, we can get it. And that has been.
We need to understand what's happening here.
Yes, we have to understand what's happening here. Because as a Black and brown person, I believe that my freedom, my liberation is not dependent on white supremacy going away. I'm going to be liberated. I'm going to get my liberation. Yeah. So I'm not that worried about it. I deal with it as it comes. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not dismissing systemic oppression. I'm not dismissing the fact that epigenetically, I have been impacted by historical trauma. In other words, it doesn't matter how much money I make. Well, I'm past childbearing age, but when I was bearing children, I was more likely to die in childbirth, no matter how much education I had, no matter how much money I made. My daughter is still that person, a Black woman who is more likely to die in childbirth than any other person. So I have been impacted genetically by the stress of systemic oppression.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing this with COVID-19 that African American populations are so much more affected and dying in much greater numbers, and yet you don't see newscasters talk. I mean, I think that should be the opening, line of every newscast, that Black people are dying and we're not doing anything. The world's not doing anything to help them.
Right. And I think that's the part of the organizing that really inspired me to make, I made this post. I think you responded to it because I'm like, I got to do a podcast because, I think we have to talk about food plus justice and democracy, because I think we have to get information out to our people. And sometimes you have to have a credible messenger. So there's some people in some places in some big houses in the United States that are not credible messengers for Black and brown people. So they're not really going to listen to anything that they have to say. But how do we create a community of care that gets out information that doesn't tell people what to do? You're grown, an adult, you do whatever you need to do, but gives you enough information to make the right decision for you.
Yeah, I mean, everyone needs those resources, no matter where you come from. But like, I like that, you're not the first person on one of these live casts to use that term, community of care.
Yeah.
And it's, really the first, I've heard it, in the past, like BC before COVID, but now I'm hearing it so much more, and like economies of care and that kind of thing. I think it's such a powerful way to look at this.
Right. I think we got caught up with the sharing economy, and it made a lot of people rich. And the people who weren't sharing were the people who were working. So now
Right.
we're understanding that, sharing isn't necessarily the precursor to well-being. We have to be in community in order to really have this caring going on. And so when we still have these hierarchical systems where the person who is at most risk makes the least money, and the person
Right.
who is not really burdened with the idea that they have to do the work makes the most money. And I'm not saying that the person with the idea should not make money, but there has to be some parity between the two, some equity between the two.
Right. Not everything can be on the backs of other people. You
No.
have to create a better system.
And if this didn't just really blow that out of the water, we have a system that is built on the backs of people who are poor, who are Black, who are brown, who are indigenous. That's who's going to work every day.
Right. Right.
That's who's in Target. That's who's the cashier. Even in our co-ops, those are the people, the young people, the moms, the single moms, the dads, and who are raising families, the queer people who have to work.
Right.
Those are the people that our system is. Those are the people who are being forced to go back to work. I mean, maybe people want to go back to work. I shouldn't judge that, but those are the people who are standing behind counters at department stores,
Right.
in malls, for hours and hours. They're going back to work with no health benefits,
Right. And no hazard pay.
no hazard pay, no protective gear, but they're being told, go back to work. Where we have to start up this economy. And this also is a point that I want to make. Starting up the economy requires them to go to work. It doesn't require people who are in big offices to go to work.
Right.
It requires people to go to the gas station and be the cashier. It requires, people who are in restaurants and cooks, and people who are cleaning homes. It requires people who we would rather not see and rather not speak to go back to work. And that's what our economy is built on. It's not built on the Bill Gates of the world or any of the wealthy folks of the world. It's built on the backs of the anonymous, poor, Black, brown, and indigenous and Asian people.
Absolutely. And what I've, been talking a lot about, or, because I'm hearing from people like you, is we have to make these folks who were invisible, we made them invisible. We chose not to look at them. They have to be more visible, and they have to be more respected and honored and paid well. And because they're forced to go back to work because they have to pay their bills, because we've created, the structure of capitalism that, if they don't pay the rent, they're kicked out, even during a pandemic. So I think, creating more visibility, through what the organization One Fair Wage has done, making sure that these folks are uplifted, that they're seen, and understood is more critical than ever.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think also employers have to be better employers.
Right.
One of the things about working in the co-op space is that there's thousands, if not millions, of jobs in cooperatives. Cooperatives have the capacity to be better employer.
Yeah.
And so we also have to have workplaces that are built on this idea of worker rights. So we can't ignore, the fact that there's some responsibility within the for-profit economy. And I appreciate all of the nonprofits that are out doing the work, but I have a deep distrust of foundations, as I have experienced.
You've expressed that over the years.
Your mind. and so they want to work on the next sexy thing. And
Right.
I think that's fine. And I also think that the places that people are going to work, the restaurants, the grocery stores, the department stores, the small businesses are the
Right.
places where the most help is needed and the most money should go. And those people that are employing folks have an obligation to be the best employer that they can be.
Absolutely. I want to step back a little bit and then get back to how we started this podcast, this intersection of food and the arts. And I know that's something that you really created with Soul Food Monologues, and just, making people aware through storytelling about, these different issues. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, sure. So I participated in a workshop at Bioneers. I know you know the folks at Bioneers, Nina
Yeah.
Siemens and Kenny. And I met a woman named Tanya Taylor Rubenstein who has a project called Story Healing. Fantastic, master teacher, and we struck up a great friendship. I went to study with her to do my own one woman show. And in the process of doing that, I got very involved in, well, how do you help other people tell their stories? So from that story healing facilitation workshop, I developed soul food monologues. And the reason I use soul as an acronym is sustainable, organic, urban, and local. And I used that because I wanted people to be able to tell their stories, much like I had been telling mine for many years.
Hmm.
And honestly, I was getting a little bored with it. I know people like the story, and I enjoy telling it to some degree, but I
Sure.
wanted to, I was evolving as an activist, as an organizer, as a woman. I was changing and getting older, and I wanted to be able to tell different stories. So I created the Soul Food Monologues and the workshop process that helps people go into workshop and basically write their own monologue. So we put them on stage, beautiful production. Put them on stage. You get about maybe a 6 or 7 minute monologue, which is pretty long. One person and
Sure.
they're at that mic, and
Right.
it's been fantastic. It's been so successful. We've done it. I've done it so many times with communities. Done it all over the state of Minnesota at the University of Minnesota a couple years ago with students. Um, I've done it with women who are farmers. I've done it in just so many different ways.
It's so
So
great.
it was really important to me. Also, we talked about this just a little bit. I was like, we're the only movement that doesn't have a movement culture. I mean, and that's why I'm like, I don't know that we have a food movement. I think we have a food clique. I think we get together, we talk, we eat, we hang out, and then poof, that
Sure.
we might do some stuff in between. And I'm not saying that the work is the work that people do when they come together is irrelevant. I am suggesting that there's more to movement than just conferences and talking. What's really important is a culture. And so the
Right.
aspects of culture include music, it includes theater. There definitely are writers who are writing, but not necessarily writing from the standpoint of storytelling. They're writing in like sort of like a finger wagging kind of thing. Yeah, the bad,
Mm-hmm.
the,
Preachy, preachy. Yeah.
yeah, kind of preachy. But to be able to tell the story of food from the personal standpoint
Right.
is revolutionary and also healing. And that was also what I wanted people to be able to do, to tell their stories, to be able to witness themselves and be witnessed by an audience in their story is cathartic.
Absolutely. And I love all of that. Healing, witnessing, just being able to share, your own viewpoint in a really constructive way. You had the greatest comment come up, and it wasn't a question, but it was like, keep on keeping on, LaDonna, and
Oh, thank
deepest
you.
respect. So it was like, if Brittany wants to put it up again, that would be great. Um, I'm there. It is Diane Dodge.
How are you? I'll definitely do that. That's also the one who's keep on keeping on. You too.
That's awesome. I've been following your work for so long, and I know you gave this great TEDx Manhattan talk in 2013, where you said that the term food desert is a cute term, and I'm wondering if you can talk about that, because we've seen that term evolve. We've heard about food swamps and other terms to use it, or food apartheid. I'm wondering, what if you can just explain a little bit more about what you meant at that time and what it means now.
Yeah. So, for me, the term food desert is a reminder of white supremacy in academia.
Mm.
So the term came up. A lot of people don't really know this story, so I'm going to tell you just a little bit of it.
Sure.
The term came up with a researcher on the Chicago Food Systems Collaborative project that I worked on. I was the program manager for it, a project manager for it. And this person had been invited to, or asked to come to our table, and invited, and we invited a number of researchers to come to our table, and we shared our data. The organizers and activists that were at the table shared data. The only issue with the sharing of data was that names of the community had to be included if you published documents or published anything. You had to include. Make a long story short, I get a phone call that's telling me that, they've decided that our community is called a food desert, and that they're, going to do this release. And I'm welcome to come to it, but I can't see it before the media gets a hold to it. And I promised this person that I would be in every piece of media that they ever got about the food desert. And I have been adamantly opposed to the usage of the term, mainly because it did not come from the community. It came from the death of a researcher who was unaffiliated with a university. And it really is symptomatic of the way that we even look at our food system, because the solutions that the food desert puts out for us is Walmart and SuperValue, Cub Foods, and major chain grocery stores. Walmart, Michelle Obama had those three players at the White House saying that they were going to solve the food desert. And here we are 10 years later, 15 years later for the term, 10 years later, I don't think there's one community that's better off because they call themselves a food desert. Now, that's just me.
Yeah.
The second, or maybe even third or fourth point that I will make is that the food desert ideology is not a liberation ideology. It does not take into account all of the wonderful work that was going on in Chicago, not just at my table, but all over Chicago. Will and Olga Allen were in Chicago, and they were beginning to do their growing power work. They had already started in Milwaukee, but they had expanded to Chicago. I was converting vacant lots to urban farm sites and working with Chicago public schools. And there were people who were doing farmers markets, and there were on and on and on. There was agency all over the city of Chicago around getting food in our neighborhoods. Yet this person decided that, and this person and a bank decided that the term food desert was the way to solve all our problems, because we didn't need to do that. I'll say one more thing. So I had, in all of this, I have, as you know, been an outspoken opponent of that term. And I get people together every time they say it to me. And I refuse to waver on it. That's just a no-go with me. I am not interested in advocating that. The thing that is interesting around the food desert, and I think I lost my point that I was going to make, but anyway, it'll come back to me. But
absolutely,
yeah. So
no, I mean, if I can just interject for a second, I think it makes communities who have been dealing with problems and helping themselves look like victims when they are not victims. And deserts implies that there's nothing there, and there's so much rich culture and sense of community and so many of these places that are termed food deserts. And so I think that's something that bothers me about it. And, you taught me not to use that term anymore, because it was something that, a lot of us who write and work on these issues just sort of, used blindly, because we thought that was the term to use. And it's, something I drill into our interns and our staff now, that it's not a term that, creates any positivity. It's not a term that we should be focusing on. There are other ways to describe these places and that are more constructive.
Right. I think that was what I was going to say. It robs communities of agency. You
Right.
know, the work that we were doing was imperfect, but hell, so is the food system. It wasn't perfect to
Right.
begin with. So I don't know that we were ever going for perfection, but we certainly were going for agency and the right to grow our own food and the right to determine what our communities looked like and what was coming out of our communities, and also to push back on this notion, which is what you just said, there wasn't anything there. So we
Right.
just call it a desert. And people actually live in the desert. So I've visited indigenous people who live in the desert. So it's not that there's nothing over there either. So even
Right.
the use of the ecological term is inappropriate and dismissive of a part of the ecosystem that really is vitally important. So I
Absolutely.
find that when people use that term or want to use that term and not realize that what they're saying is really undermining the work that they want to do. So you want to, and I know we have to say all kinds of things in proposals and things like that, but I
Sure.
wonder if the same thing, enough of a food desert. Oh, I know what I was going to say. So I had a funder one time tell me, well, I wanted to build a grocery store in my neighborhood, and that's what my neighborhood wanted, and we had been working for it. And I had a funder tell me, I think he thought it was the most ridiculous idea ever. Like, why do you want to build a grocery store? I mean, it just makes no sense. I mean, there are other people who know how to do it. So
Right.
it's like you want to go to the moon. I mean, why would you build a rocket ship? Why don't you go to NASA? And I was like, oh my God, it's so amazing that you would liken going to the grocery store with going to the moon, because that's what the hell it is. And it shouldn't be like going
Right.
to the moon. It should be as easy and as effortless as everybody else's visit to the
Right.
grocery store or to get food. It should be a no-brainer, but it's
Right.
not. It's not rocket science to get food. It should not be rocket science.
No.
But that's the mentality that people have when they look at these other communities and say, you don't have the right to choose, you don't have the right to create. And that is what the food desert phrase
Yeah.
means. You don't have the right to pick your food system. You don't have the right to participate in the food
Right.
system of your choice.
Well, I mean, there's so much of this, whether we're talking about the United States or we're talking about the global South, where, well-meaning, they are well-meaning, development workers or, aid agencies go in and they tell communities, here's what you need, and we're going to figure out a way to give it to you. Instead of asking those communities, what do you want? What do you want from your community? How can we help you get there? And it's, you need this paradigm shift in how we think of sort of development, whether it's community development or international development.
Right.
And
Well,
that
the other piece of it, stop stealing from them. I mean, you look at Africa. Africa has the youngest population in the world. The continent has
right.
the youngest people all over the world, and their young people are leaving the continent because they are being told and forced to leave because they don't have any access to the resources. Yet we extract so much of our lives out of Africa to have our cell phones and to have our fabrics and our materials and our oil and all of that. If we could just stop stealing from folks, if we could pay folks well, pay them for their labor, not charge them for being poor. It's like like a poverty tax. To be poor, you got to pay more for everything. You get
so expensive.
In a poor neighborhood. You have more policing, so you're more likely to get shot by the police in a poor neighborhood, particularly in a poor Black or brown neighborhood. But actually, you could be Black or brown anywhere and get shot. So I'm sorry to have to bust my bubble with that one. But my point is that if we could get to a system where people could just get the money that they need to live the lives that they want, then we could all be better off, and we wouldn't have to serve them because people
Right.
have agency and they could do it for themselves.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Before we end, I want to make sure that people know where to get in touch with you. They can go to colluminate.coop. Any other websites you want to give out?
Yeah, you can go to my website, LaDonnaSandersRedmond.com. And on there, you'll find ways to connect with me. I'm going to be launching a podcast. It'll be ready June 1st.
Exciting.
Food Plus Justice Equals Democracy is the name of the title.
I love it. I love it. We will have all that information on our website too, so that people can get it easily. So when they go to foodtank.com, when this comes out on our podcast tomorrow, they can get all that information.
Fantastic.
You had another great comment. Madam Soybean says truth! Exclamation point. So people love you, LaDonna.
Thank you.
My final question right now is, you and I have been talking about how COVID-19 may be this great opportunity for changing the food system, and I do hope it is. Who is making you feel hopeful about that right now? Is there a particular person who inspires you?
Wow. All of the people, I mean, the farmers, the small family farmers, the CSA producers are so inspiring because I know where to get my chickens. I know where to get
lucky.
I know where to get the food that I want because I've been talking to these people for years and they are ready. Our local food system is our best hope. I am fortunate that I am able to shelter at home and talk to people all over the world. So I am inspiration from like parts of the world that I just have never gotten a chance to visit by getting online and participating in all kinds of classes and learning about all kinds of different approaches to the food system, particularly around trauma and healing. So I'm trying to think of folks, but my usual folks, my go-to folks are folks like Dr. Monica White, dear friend and author of Freedom Farmer books. I mean, her work and the students that she's lifting up give me tremendous hope. Of course, I just got through listening to a podcast with Angela Davis and Nikki Giovanni on Girl Trek. Oh my God. I mean, Girl Trek is an organization that gives me a lot of hope to get out and walk and take care of my own health in terms of my wellness and seeing all of the people who are making masks and have this little cottage industry of creativity and making those masks. So many people, and I don't want to, I mean, I can name, I'm thinking of this Nakima, and I'm totally blanking on Nakima's last name, and I'm gonna probably come with me. This is age talking, right? But
no,
is an attorney and a civil rights leader. And doing fantastic work, getting out every week with another person, Chantal, and handing out sanitizers and masks to people in North Minneapolis who may not have access to these things. So those little acts of courage to stand up and say
bravery for sure,
and not just to say it's wrong, but to get out and make something happen. So I'm getting my hope from so many of these people who are just standing up and saying, hey, we can talk about what's wrong, but we're going to do something about what's wrong.
I love it. I'm so glad you could be with me today. Thanks again for responding to my random Facebook message. A reminder that this episode will also be on our podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. And please join me on our next episode when I'll be talking to Rob LaRue, the president of the National Farmers Union. Thank you, LaDonna. Please stay well.
I will. You do the same. Thank you.
Thank you.